Tonight on Primetime, the United States is expanding its military presence across the Middle East, announcing fresh exercises as tensions with Iran remain elevated. Washington says the move is designed to reinforce deterrence and reassure allies. But across the region, the timing is being closely watched, with concerns that increased military activity could harden positions and complicate already fragile diplomatic dynamics. More muscle means more pressure. Good evening. The United States is stepping up its military presence in the Middle East, announcing new exercises at a time when tensions with Iran are already high. Well, Washington says this is about deterrence, but in parts of the region, there's quiet concern that more military movements could end up making a tense situation even harder to manage.
The United States has announced new multi-day military exercises in the Middle East as it deploys a major naval force to the region amid escalating tensions with Iran. US Central Command says the drills are intended to demonstrate Washington's ability to project air power across the region. No details on the timing or location have been released. The announcement comes as CENTCOM confirms the arrival of a US carrier strike group led by the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. The United States has also moved F-15E fighter jets to the region, while the United Kingdom has deployed Typhoon aircraft in what it describes as a defensive role. US President Donald Trump said Washington has positioned a large armada near Iran as a deterrent, while stressing that the United States remains open to dialogue.
And by the way, there's another beautiful armada floating beautifully toward Iran right now. So we'll see. I hope they make a deal. I hope they make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time they'd have a country.
US officials say the carrier deployment reflects a defensive posture aimed at deterrence and regional stability. Iranian leaders have condemned the carrier's presence as destabilizing, with state media stressing national sovereignty and defensive preparedness. The military build-up follows months of unrest in Iran linked to economic pressure and mass protests. Human rights groups estimate thousands have been killed, though exact figures remain difficult to verify due to censorship and internet restrictions. Some US allies have voiced concern, with the United Arab Emirates saying it will not allow its territory or airspace to be used for any attack on Iran, stressing neutrality and regional stability.
Okay, joining us now to discuss the implications in the region is Luciano Zacara, a Middle East analyst who is in Doha, Qatar. Luciano, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. Doha's a place I know very well. I'll be there myself on Sunday. It's got a very particular lens, hasn't it, onto the region. From where you're sitting, does this US military build-up feel like reassurance or adding risk to an already difficult situation?
Well, I believe it's adding more tension and more preoccupation for the inhabitants of these countries, considering that what already happened in June was that direct confrontation between the US and got an impact here in Qatar with the retaliation by Iran. So the GCC states are very worried that the further operation from the United States will force a retaliation from Iran to American bases in the region, that they are spread all over the Arabian Peninsula. One can think that if the United States decided to mobilize the whole fleet of the Lincoln, the best aircraft carrier they have so far in the fleet, from the Chinese scenario to the Gulf, is not to make tourism. It's to use it as a very strong deterrent to push Iran to sign something, or in the event of attack, use the best naval fleet that they have empower the US. So I think that if the Lincoln is coming here with a very strong discourse that Trump has been using the last couple of weeks. I doubt that they are not going to do something, at least to give a more strong signal to Iran that if they don't negotiate, they will use the force definitely.
And what do you think the Gulf region leaders are thinking and feeling at the moment? Because obviously, as you say, Washington talks about deterrence, but do you think they feel sufficiently reassured? Do you think Washington has said to them, look, this time I promise nothing bad will happen? Because we had promises before, reassurance before. There always seems to be trouble that emerges. Do you think they feel this time more reassured that this will be managed in a way that where there isn't spillover to the other Gulf countries?
I think that the very strong statement both by Emirates and by Saudi Arabia saying that they will not allow their airspace to be used to attack Iran is a very strong statement, claiming that they don't want to be at all involved in any offensive operation against Iran because they don't want to be part of this retaliation. This shows that they are not 100% sure this is not going to happen because it already happened here in Qatar. Qatar is not allowing the base also. I mean, any of the GCC states interested in being involved in an attack, nobody wants to risk an escalation with Iran, a country that they already accepted that they need to deal with and that they need to incorporate in any discussion that is happening in the Gulf. Although they understand that the United States need to fix their situation and their problems, mainly regarding the nuclear issue, but they don't see that the military strike is the best solution because it will definitively have a spill over effect on the GCC. There is no way that Iran can retaliate directly to the US because of the distance. So the only option that the Iranians have is to retaliate against American interests in the region. So the closest interests that the Americans have in the region are in the GCC.
What's your gut feel, Luciano, of what Mr. Trump is doing here? Do you think, does this look like to you a grand show of strength in order to start negotiating? Or do you think we should really genuinely worry that missiles are going to start flying towards Tehran?
What I hope is just a bluff. That is one of the bluffs that we are used to hear from him when he keeps announcing tariffs, 100, 200% tariff to everybody, and then at the end of the day, so far nothing happened or very minimal tariffs were imposed because at the end of the day he negotiated. So I hope he's bluffing and he's trying to show the very big stick with a very small carrot, and at the end he will sit with the Iranians. He kept repeating also that the Iranians want to speak and want to talk, and they will do it. So I am also convinced that he wants to make a deal, that he doesn't want to start a war. But considering what happened in Venezuela, this is a mixed signal that we are receiving, and the previous attack against Iran in June when he was dragged by Israel. So we have the two signals, whether he's bluffing or he's really serious when he claims that he's going to attack, because both things happen. So in this case, it's very difficult to figure out what is passing through his mind.
Yeah, it's
my main approach here is that if the fleet came, it's for something.
It's a very interesting point you make, because there is a diplomatic blueprint here, isn't there, with President Trump? You know, it's been characterized as somebody walking into a bar room and throwing the biggest haymaker punch possible, saying the most offensive thing possible. Everybody then obviously is in uproar, and then the de-escalation process takes place to arrive at some sort of negotiated position. That does seem to be something he does a lot, and there are signs that this is consistent with that. Nevertheless, people are worried. What is the biggest worry, do you think, from the Gulf leaders? Is it specifically about escalation with Iran, or is it domestic pressure at home, or is it being pulled into some kind of wider, interconnected confrontation?
Well, I think the biggest risk is the spillover effect, and I believe, as you said before, there's a blueprint of Trump that he is giving the enemy, the possibility to retaliate or at least to save face. This is part of his business mentality, that he's trying to find a win-win situation, not the win-lose situation, because the enemy at the end of the day, an enemy that is hurt but not totally destroyed is more dangerous. And I think that Trump doesn't want to destroy Iran. He wants to give Iran the opportunity to negotiate something, to recover, to negotiate with others, not with with Khamenei or the clerical elite, in order to make business in Iran. So I think that the main threat here is if the United States decide to make a big strike that is leaving no opportunity for the Iranians to retaliate, or to at least to save face, or at least to give room for de-escalation. I think that the worst option is what Israel is pushing the United States to do, which is to overthrow the regime, or even to dismember Iran. I hope Trump is not thinking on that. He's thinking on a kind of attack that allows the political regime to survive to some extent and to have room for negotiation in a post-Khamenei era, or post-even Islamic Republic era.
What's your sense of what's going on in the minds of the leaders in Tehran at this point? I mean, Iran has famously shrewd diplomats, although they've clearly miscalculated the domestic situation somewhat. What's your sense of what they're thinking and feeling right now?
Well, the Islamic Republic has survived for more than 40 years with external and internal pressure. It's true that the internal pressure now is much higher than any time before, and also the external pressure. But we have to remember also that Iran was, at the beginning of the Islamic Republic, facing an 8-year war without any allies, without anybody that was helping in Iran, and they survived nonetheless. So I think that they are used to work within a very strict framework of pressure internally and externally, with sanctions, etc., etc. So it's not the first time that they will have to deal with a very critical situation. The problem is always there are ways to control what is happening inside. We see that the protests so far, they did not change that much. They harm the legitimacy, they harm the government, but still the government is in place. And after so many years of sanctions and escalations with the US, with Israel, including 2024 and 2025, still the system is resilient. So I don't think there is a miscalculation on the Iranian side in this case, but it all depends on how resilient and how pragmatic they are. At some point, I assume that the Iranians will be willing to negotiate. The problem is how to negotiate. With the fleet arriving and announcing that they will attack, it will be very difficult to extract an agreement from the Iranian side. If there is some signal from Trump saying that, okay, I will move the fleet, but so far we are not going to do anything, it's just for defense, and there is no offensive action, I think they will open the door for the Iranians to sit at the table. That's a
very good question. Who needs to move first to get this de-escalation going? Is it the United States? Is it Iran? Is it possibly the intervention of another actor? And what would they need to offer? In terms of Iran and Mr. Trump, would they need to offer him something around a promise for further commitments to not pursuing nuclear ambitions? Would it be about making sure they make changes to appear like democracy is allowed to flourish in the country? Who moves first, and what do they have to offer the other?
I think that the first step now needs to be taken by Trump, because the one who is moving the offensive force, an immense offensive force to the Gulf, is the United States, with the very clear statements about obliterating Iran if they don't sit to negotiate. So I think that the first move needs to be done by Trump. And what Trump can offer, I think, is the guarantee that the military option will be at least not on the table for a while the negotiations are on. And this is what the Iranians have been asking. Negotiations cannot happen under bombs. In June, during the war, there were negotiations going on between Iran and the United States in Oman, and between Iran and the European Union in Istanbul. So these military operations happened while Iran was talking. Maybe they were not very productive conversations, but they were conversations. There was no military threat on the table. Now the military threat is on the table, and Trump keeps insisting that this will remain on the table. Literally, he said that help is on its way to help the protesters to overthrow the regime. So it will be very difficult if Trump is not giving the opposite signal to achieve Iran to sit on the table. Iran wants negotiations without war. And this is something that so far Trump is not ready to do.
Very interesting indeed. Mr. Zakara, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Doha.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, let's now take a look at this from another angle. Joining me to discuss the potential motives of the US in the Middle East is the Middle East Politics and International Relations researcher at Lancaster University, Guy Burton. Mr. Burton, thank you very much for joining us. Lots of different connotations to this then, but these military moves, hugely dramatic, how are they interpreted in the Middle East? Because there's a very different impression of what's going on in the Gulf countries, in other countries around the region, than the impression that is being given in Washington.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. And I think really it's leading on from what your previous guest, Luciano, was just talking about. I don't think it's just in the Gulf that there is concern about this. I think if you look at what is happening in relation to Iran's neighbors, they're also concerned about what instability and a potential fragmentation of Iran could mean. Take Turkey, for example. Turkey's concerned about Kurdish forces around that region, and of course is nervous about what message this might send if Kurdish people were to become stronger in Iran, and if there was separatism to happen. Similarly in Pakistan as well. I mean, there's the buffer space between Iran and Pakistan, Baluchistan, which has had some separatist elements over the years. And so there's a real, I think, concern not just within the Gulf as to what this might mean. And then, of course, if you think about Israel, America's chief ally in the region, certainly they have been enthusiastic about seeing an end to both Iran's nuclear threat as well as the regime. But I think there must be some nervousness there as well as to what impact any kind of attack on Iran might do. Because, as Luciano was saying, it's not going to be the case that Iran would necessarily hit back with reprisals, outside of the region. It would be within the region, and that could potentially have a threat for Israel.
And what about that? I mean, Mr. Trump is a polarizing figure, of course. Nevertheless, like many other countries, he has a team of very intelligent advisors, diplomats. I mean, this is something that must have been scenario planned, thought through. What do you think the thinking is in Washington about the likelihood of that regional spillover, the conflict igniting in the region? Is it something that they're confident that is going to be avoided? Or is it something perhaps that they're less worried about?
I mean, who knows really? I mean, if we take, for example, the instance of Venezuela, which is only a few weeks ago, and yet it seems a lifetime ago. I mean, there was no doubt that the Americans could mount an operation to extract President Maduro, which they did. But of course, there was real potential of spillover into the wider Venezuelan political system, as well as Latin American reaction to that. So it is a question as to how much regional concerns play into American actions. And I think one thing that we're also overlooking here as well is not just whether the Americans can do it in the region, but also what are the motivations for it. And it's fairly unclear to me as to what is exactly the driving motivation for Trump here. I mean, is it about Iran's nuclear threat, which has been degraded since the attacks from last year? Is it about sending a message after the protests which the Iranian regime has clamped down on several weeks ago. If you recall, a few weeks back, Trump was talking about coming to the rescue there. Is it about regime change? I think a lot of these things are somewhat uncertain. We don't really know what is the driving force here. And then finally, of course, there is domestic situation back in the United States as well. Trump could use a distraction given the way that his ICE agents have been going around killing US citizens. And so some deflection from what's going on at home would be quite appreciated, I think, for him.
To that end then, Guy, do you think there is a longer term plan, but we just don't know it? Or is this just more about day-to-day risk management?
I think it's when it comes to Trump himself, I think he does seem to go from day to day. I mean, we heard, for example, over Venezuela, for instance, that the Americans were going to take over that country. Well, that hasn't happened yet, and Maduro's vice president has stepped up and replaced him. Was it about oil? Well, that's another questionable thing to ask, because of course, Venezuelan oil production is relatively low and needs a considerable amount of investment. So when it comes to Iran here, what exactly is it that Trump wants? As I've said, there's a number of different possibilities as to what motivates him. But whether it actually continues the day after it is another matter entirely, of course. He does have a tendency to move from one thing to another. In this 1 month alone, we've had not only Venezuela, we've had Ukraine, and we've had Greenland, and now we're on to Iran, and January's not even done yet. I mean, you're right to say that there are people around him, and certainly there is within the Republican Party a strong movement that wants to, that the neoconservative movement that's very keen to see the elimination of the Iranian regime as well as its nuclear threat. And of course, at some times, Trump and that particular group do come together. But whether it's sustainable in the long or continues into the long term is another matter entirely.
And let's just, you mentioned Europe at the start of the conversation, Guy. Let's just take a look at Europe now. European capitals reacting, very, very difficult, this situation for European leaders to try and sort of tiptoe their way through, isn't it? On the one hand, having to look tough and involved. On the other hand, not wanting to pledge too much in the way of allegiance to Donald Trump. What's going on now in Europe? What is the nature of the concern, and what do you think European leaders are likely to do next?
Well, of course, European leaders have to also factor in, their wider relationship with the United States. It's not just about Iran. Certainly the Europeans, and it's really, if you limit it to primarily the French, the British, and the Germans, who've been doing pretty much the lead on this. I mean, they would much rather see negotiations. They'd like to see the Iranians climb down on their nuclear program and commit to it only being a civilian program and with no potential for nuclear, for it becoming military. They would like to see Iran end executions, release political prisoners. But of course, it's also at the same time worth noting that the Europeans don't have a lot of leverage here. Even if they could reach an agreement with the Iranians, who's to say that they're speaking on behalf of the United States here? How confident can they be that the Americans will actually commit to any kind of deal that is made? We've seen, for instance, when it comes to the JCPOA, which was agreed with the Europeans and the Americans and Iran over a decade ago, the Americans effectively unilaterally walked out of that. And the Europeans tried to establish a new kind of trading mechanism that didn't fall foul of sanctions. That didn't really work. In many ways, the Europeans don't have a lot of influence or leverage in the region itself. And so, of course, they will also be concerned about potential spillover, should there be any kind of attacks and Iranian reprisals in relation to European interests, either in the region or in Europe. So I think the Europeans have this awkward situation that they're not that particularly powerful when it comes to making an agreement with Iran. And at the same time, of course, they have their own interests back here in the continent. The number one issue is, of course, Ukraine and Greenland. And there's a sensitivity as to how can they get the Americans to commit to something like Ukraine and commit to NATO while at the same time not upsetting Trump here. And of course, that's going to sort of play out in terms of Iran. Is it worth going the extra mile to potentially antagonize him there?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation for them, guys, isn't it? And I suppose on the other hand as well, they've also got one eye on the polls in their own countries. You know, if you look at Mr. Starmer, you look at Monsieur Macron, Mr. Merz, they've got, these are leaders who have difficult challenges at home. The rise of right-wing parties, varying degrees of popularity, not always good news in the polls recently for those leaders. So very difficult for them to really commit to a particular strong course of action. When you look at the relationship between the diplomatic relationship between the EU and the US, and you sort of chart what's happened over the last few years, is there any sort of trajectory that we're on where you think we can say, okay, the gap is getting wider or the gap is getting closer together? Are things better or worse than they were, say, 12 months ago?
I think this is where it's also quite useful to go back to the Mark Carney speech that Canada's Prime Minister at Davos at the World Economic Forum last week. He effectively said the quiet thing out loud. I think if you're in the global south, there has always been this sense that the international liberal order never really works. But it's surprising to hear it from a Western leader saying it. If you come to Europe, there has been conversations and discussions, certainly since the first Trump presidency, that Europe needs greater strategic autonomy. But there has at the same time been a difficulty in realizing that. If anything, the last 12 months, what Carney has said has made it clearer that effectively Europe does need to become more independent and more autonomous. The problem is, of course, that they're struggling to achieve that. Take, for example, Ukraine. The Americans have effectively ended their aid since the start of Trump 2.0, and the Europeans really haven't yet managed to step up and replace the United States in that respect. So they're in this awkward situation of wanting to go it alone, but recognize that they can't do it at the same time, that they do need to bring the Americans with them. And I think there's also a sense with many decision makers in Europe as well, that maybe we might be able to default and go back to the past. Though certainly that was the assumption when Biden was president between 2021 and 24. But what I think Carney said last week, which stood out, was that he said we can't go back there. So the question is, of course, whether European decision makers will be able to finally accept that the gap has become too wide between Europe and America, and that the Europeans really do need to do this. But coming back to Iran, this is obviously problematic because in many ways, the Europeans are dissatisfied with the regime. They're dissatisfied with the nature of the nuclear program. There is, of course, difficulties in terms of sort of sanctions as well. We're still a couple of countries away from the European Union actually being able to designate the Revolutionary Guards in Iran as a terrorist organization. And of course, Tehran has reacted to that, responded by saying that if the Europeans did go down that path, that there would be reprisals. And so that is something that European decision makers do need to keep in mind. So there is a sense that the Europeans would like Iran, the problem on Iran, the Iranian file to be ended, to go away, but it's not going to be going anytime soon. And the difficulty for them is that they're not really in a position to be able to do it alone.
Guy, my first namesake that we've had on this show. Great to get your analysis. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll be taking a look at the top business stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. Monsieur Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back to PrimeTime now. Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories. Andy, plenty of tension and fear in the geopolitical environment. Hopefully you're going to cheer us up with some more positive business news stories.
Well, I'd hope to do so, Guy, but those geopolitical tensions have had their impact on global markets as well. We've seen the US dollar decline while gold soared to a new record high. There's some new trade tensions in South America. Beijing has cleared the way for the import of NVIDIA's chips, and there's also some corporate news across industries, so let's have a look. First up, the US dollar fell to a near 4-year low after President Donald Trump downplayed its decline, prompting traders to sell the currency aggressively. Gold prices, however, soared past $5,300 per ounce.
You all doing all right? You going over to the speaker?
The US dollar was grappling with a crisis of confidence as it struggled near 4-year lows on Wednesday after President Donald Trump brushed off its recent weakness, exacerbating the dollar selling and lifting the yen, euro and sterling. Trump said on Tuesday the value of the dollar was great when asked whether he thought it had declined too much. Traders took his comments as a signal to sell the greenback aggressively. Trump's comments were not exactly new, but they came at a time when the dollar has been under pressure, as traders braced for a possible coordinated currency intervention by US and Japanese authorities to stabilize the yen. The dollar tumbled over 9% in 2025 and has started the year on the back foot, already down about 2.3% in January, as Trump's erratic approach to trade and international diplomacy, fears over the Federal Reserve's independence and huge increases in public spending rattled investors. Meanwhile, gold broke through $5,300 for the first time on Wednesday as the dollar plunged. Spot gold climbed 2.3% to $5,305 per ounce after hitting a record high of $5,311. It has gained more than 20% since the start of the year. US gold futures for February delivery surged 4.3% to $5,301 per ounce. A weaker dollar makes greenback-priced bullion more attractive to overseas buyers.
Trade tensions between Andean neighbors Colombia and Ecuador escalated once more, with Bogota announcing a 30% tariff on a range of Ecuadorian products. The latest measure came in response to Ecuador raising the transit fee for Colombian oil through its Trans-Ecuadorian pipeline.
Colombia announced on Tuesday a 30% tariff on 23 Ecuadorian products in response to its neighbouring country's hike in oil transport fees, although it said it's open to talks to find solutions. Ecuador increased on Friday the transit fee for Colombian oil through its Trans-Ecuadorian pipeline system from $2.5 to more than $30 per barrel, according to the Colombian government. The measure escalates trade tensions between the Andean neighbours after Ecuador announced on January 24th a 30% security charge on Colombian imports due to the lack of cooperation in combating drug trafficking at the border.
Colombia retaliated by imposing equivalent tariffs on approximately 20 Ecuadorian products and suspending electricity supplies to Ecuador. In 2024, Ecuador's oil company Petroecuador signed a contract with Colombia's Ecopetrol to provide crude oil transportation services through the San Miguel to Lago Agrio and Transecuadorian pipelines, which connect to Colombia's Putumayo region. The contract was signed for 3 years for an initial average of 13,250 barrels per day of Colombian crude, with an assigned capacity of up to 22,000 barrels per day, with an approximate fee of about $3 per barrel, according to Ecopetrol.
China has approved its first batch of NVIDIA's H200 AI chips for import, clearing the main barrier for shipments after Washington greenlit the exports. The clearance covers several 100,000 H200 chips.
China has approved its first batch of NVIDIA's H200 artificial intelligence chips for import, according to Reuters sources familiar with the matter. It's a notable shift as Beijing tries to balance its AI development needs with support for its domestic semiconductor industry. The approval covers several 100,000 H200 chips and was granted during NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang's visit to China this week, according to the sources, who requested anonymity due to the sensitivity of the matter. Tu said the semiconductors would go to tech giants ByteDance, Alibaba and Tencent, with more firms waiting in line for future approvals. The H200 is NVIDIA's second most powerful AI chip and a key flashpoint in US-China relations. Washington has cleared it for export, but Beijing's hesitation to allow imports has been the main barrier to shipments. Chinese firms have already ordered over 2 million H200 chips, far beyond NVIDIA's available inventory, and while domestic alternatives such as Huawei are improving, they still lag well behind the H200 chip's performance. It remains unclear how many additional approvals Beijing will grant as it weighs access to foreign chips against long-term tech self-reliance.
Next up, SpaceX is considering an initial public offering in mid-June, aiming to raise up to $50 billion at a $1.5 trillion valuation, according to reports. If successful, it will become the largest IPO in history.
Elon Musk's SpaceX is considering a mid-June initial public offering. That's according to the Financial Times on Wednesday, citing sources. The report said the rocket and satellite company would aim to raise as much as $50 billion at a valuation of roughly $1.5 trillion. The reported fundraising target doubles prior reports. It positions SpaceX's listing as the largest in history in terms of deal size, beating Saudi Aramco's $29 billion IPO in 2019 that gave the oil giant a $1.7 trillion market capitalization. And it is still the only completed deal to have hit a valuation over $1 trillion. The report added that SpaceX's chief financial officer has held talks with existing private investors since December to explore this IPO. Musk has long expressed a preference for keeping SpaceX private, but sources indicate that the company's growing valuation and the success of its Starlink internet service has led a shift in strategy. Reuters reported last week SpaceX is lining up 4 Wall Street banks for leading roles in its market debut, citing a source.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Still with corporate news, Amazon confirmed the layoff of 16,000 employees, citing the need to streamline operations and adjust to market realities. This completes a plan for around 30,000 job reductions initiated back in October.
Amazon confirmed 16,000 corporate job cuts on Wednesday, completing a plan for around 30,000 since October, while leaving open the possibility of further reductions. Although 30,000 represents a small portion of Amazon's 1.5 million employees, who are mostly in fulfillment centers and warehouses, it is nearly 10% of its corporate workforce. Amazon's top human resources executive said the cuts were necessary to strengthen the company by reducing layers, increasing ownership, and removing bureaucracy. They left open the possibility of further losses, saying some teams will continue to make adjustments as appropriate. The latest cuts mark the second major round of layoffs in 3 months after Amazon pared 14,000 jobs in October, saying at the time that artificial intelligence and concerns over shifting corporate culture were to blame. Amazon has also said it overhired during the COVID-19 pandemic when demand for online shopping skyrocketed.
And finally, shares of the world's biggest luxury conglomerate, LVMH, dropped 7% after the company reported fourth quarter results, disappointing markets with weaker margins.
LVMH shares fell 7% on Wednesday following its fourth quarter results announcement, with the market disappointed at the luxury group's weaker margins and cautious tone on the initial signs of a recovery in demand. LVMH, the world's biggest luxury conglomerate with brands from Louis Vuitton to Tiffany and Moet and Chandon Champagne, is a bellwether for the industry. And the move also dragged down shares in Gucci owner Kering, Moncler and Hermes by between 2% and 5%. The French group said sales in the key Chinese market grew in the quarter, but the results were less encouraging than expected in the wake of more upbeat comments on China from Richemont and Burberry earlier this month. Analysts also said a sharp revenue decline at LVMH's wine and spirits group was a concern, even though the business accounts for only a small share of its overall sales. CEO Bernard Arnault told a press conference following the results release on Tuesday that LVMH would continue to limit its costs this year, underlining that geopolitical crises and economic uncertainty were reasons to be cautious. A combination of US tariffs, a weak dollar and slowing demand has weighed on the group's profit margins, and the company said further sales growth will be needed for margins to rebound.
2025 commence de manière.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, my daughter is a very big fan of pretty much all of the LVMH brands. I'm less of a fan, partly because I would like to retire sometime before I'm 85. Is there any sense at all that these prices now are going to get even higher?
Well, Guy, you can never tell, really. Might as well. I don't know.
Okay, God, never mind. Okay, well, we wish the group well. After the break, we'll take a look at Azerbaijan's foreign minister in China and what this visit signals diplomatically. Do stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم
ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب أهلية.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi as part of his official visit to the People's Republic of China. Now, ministers emphasised the importance of deepening cooperation based on mutual trust and respect, particularly in trade, economic development and transport. They highlighted joint efforts on the Middle Corridor and the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route. The meeting also provided an opportunity to update the Chinese side on post-conflict reconstruction and ongoing challenges related to landmines.
愿加入全球治理之友小组。
Joining us now is A News's Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkan Amishov. Orkan, great to have you here. Busy diplomatic times in Beijing. UK Prime Minister arriving, Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister. Is this just timing, or does it say something about the way China's positioning itself right now?
Yeah, fascinating inquiry, Guy. I think it would require a stretch of the imagination to think that these two concurrent visits are kind of choreographed, they're happening simultaneously for a reason. There's no sort of a deep reason on the basis of which we can actually conclude that they deliberately decide, Azerbaijani Foreign Minister and British Prime Minister, to organize these two trips simultaneously. But there's a logic, of course, and I see where you're coming from. It effectively reflects on China's indispensable role as a global player, and also it's a no-brainer that all countries around the world, and this applies to the UK and Azerbaijan, they need to have good functional relationships with China, which is the world's second biggest economy. In the same way you need to have good relations with the United States, the same logic explains why you should have good relations with China. UK is a different story, of course, as long as UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's ongoing 3-day official visit to China at the invitation of Chinese Premier is concerned. That is probably, I imagine, is about repairing the relations, because due to the political reasons, geopolitical constraints, due to the pressure exerted by Washington DC, at this juncture UK needs to repair the current strained relations with China. This is one aspect. There are many problems there which UK will need to address to make sure the UK economy is open to Chinese investment, but on a selective basis. You can't open the entire UK economy to China due to national guardrails, for example. But as long as Azerbaijan is concerned, there is a great deal to improve and to elevate. I mean, over the past 18 months, basically since summer 2024, Azerbaijani-Chinese bilateral ties have moved from strategic partnership, from strategic partnership to comprehensive strategic partnership. So in June 2024, Azerbaijan and China agreed on key fundamentals. I mean, for China to have strategic relation with anybody, with any actor, there must be a recognition of one China policy by that very actor. Azerbaijan fully supports China's one China policy. There's absolutely no recognition of the administration based in Taiwan. Azerbaijan perceives entire China as one whole, and of course, in return, China supports Azerbaijan's peace agenda with Armenia. And then, of course, these two countries agreed on a very fundamental thing, which is about effectively synchronizing and these two separate things which are being viewed from the same lens from the perspective of Beijing and Baku. You got a Belt and Road Initiative, which is a three-dimensional aspect, but middle corridor component of Belt and Road Initiative is effectively commensurate with Azerbaijan's middle corridor approach. This is another thing. And then last year, when President Aliyev was paying a state visit to China, which was in April 2025, Azerbaijan and China signed a comprehensive strategic partnership. So basically, over the past 2 years, these two countries have built institutional framework, fundamental compartments related to AI, green technology, energy, and so forth. And now we need to, these two countries need to build upon those foundations. And I think green technology, electric vehicles, and many other areas will dominate the landscape in the context of that bilateral meeting of the Foreign Minister Jehun Bayramov with his Chinese counterpart.
Lots of positive things, as you say, to look at when it comes to the bilateral Azerbaijan-China relationship, connectivity, consistent support of the One China policy, as you just mentioned. Turning to Keir Starmer, though, he's in a difficult position, isn't he? Yeah. Because to some degree, and you can almost see this from the pictures that we've seen, you can see that his lack of support at home domestically is weighing on him. He's having to dance through a kind of a minefield of difficult situations in terms of the relationship between the UK and the US and Europe. Yeah. How do you think China sees the UK at the moment? Still the 5th or 6th biggest economy in the world, depending on which data you read. But is there a sense, do you think, with the Chinese that the UK isn't what it once was?
Well, there is I think when we look at Chinese political establishment, there is still a memory of the British Empire, the Opium War, the humiliation that Chinese suffered at the hands of the British Empire and those people who were fulfilling British imperial designs there in China. And that memory is still there. And the times change, and naturally we change with the times. And now China is the world's 2nd biggest economy. Britain is no longer an empire upon which sun never set. And sort of asymmetry emerged, and Chinese feel it in relation to the UK. And quite often, sometimes they mention it. You could quite often hear from those Chinese analysts close to the Chinese establishment that, well, our key competitor is United States. UK is just one of those powers that we deal with. I think there is a deal of artificial, perhaps, and carefully constructed sort of the snobbishness that may come from there. But ultimately, UK is still very consequential. Yes, please do.
Yeah, this mega embassy in London that's causing a huge amount of controversy. Yeah. I guess that must have bought Sir Keir some brownie points with the Chinese leadership.
Yes, indeed, it must have. And also, Sir Keir Starmer lost some brownie points in connection with Americans, in his dealings with Americans, because what is very clear when it comes to the way United States looks at Europe's relations with China, they want to be in a domineering position. They do not want China to get that kind of influence in relation to Europe, which will undermine US clout in respect to Europe, and therefore we have found ourselves in a very intricate situation. I think for the UK foreign policy over the years, for the past 3 decades, it was absolutely vital to maintain the special relationship with the United States, to make sure Britain is never fully dependent on Europe, but also Britain can use its power in order to navigate between Europe and United States, and simultaneously to project a greater power in relation to China. There are certain aspects of UK economy which are open to Chinese markets, Chinese capital flows, and US does not provide that sort of access to Chinese capital. I think there's one particular element. The Chinese markets must be exploited, of course, but when it comes to UK, there's one particular aspect. It's the financial services. UK, London is still one of the world's global financial capitals, and that financial services, that non-sensitive AI sectors perhaps should be open to Chinese economy, Chinese money, Chinese capital. And I think the challenge for the UK at present is to make sure that with the proper application of those national guardrails, to ensure that sensitive areas like telecommunications, for example, are not open to Chinese investment. So whenever there is a security shield, China may invest, but when there's something very, very essential, which could have bearing upon UK's bilateral ties with US and with other I5 countries, there's a blockage, complete protection, and China doesn't like that. It's a trade relationship, and there is an asymmetry. UK cannot outperform China in manufacturing, and therefore, in that £103 billion trade turnover figure, you got 42 billion pounds deficit for the UK, and that will not be sorted out anytime soon. And I don't think it's the UK's ambition to sort it out.
Okay, that's the UK. Let's bring things back to Azerbaijan. Sure. You spoke about connectivity, the importance of connectivity, the trade relations with between Baku and Beijing. Where are we with that? How significant is the current flow of trade between the two countries? And crucially, where might we get to over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
I think that the real situation now on the ground is that trade turnover is increasing exponentially. I mean, Azerbaijan-China trade turnover, the volume of the trade is estimated at, I think, at 4.5 billion US dollars. It's a very significant figure, in particular if you're comparing this figure to what was the figure 3 years ago. Azerbaijan's trade turnover with the United States, for example, is about 1.5 billion US dollars. With China, it is 4.5, and it is increasing. Naturally, it is mostly thanks to Chinese exports to Azerbaijan, because China is a manufacturing powerhouse, an export-oriented economy. In one particular section where China is going to be very influential. It's already influential. It's green energy, green technology. Azerbaijan has got an ambition to increase its green energy prowess, this solar and wind power prowess, and Chinese investment are going to play an important role. There are joint initiatives as well. Azerbaijan has an ambition of increasing its green energy capacity up to 2.7 gigawatt by 2037, and that's going to happen thanks to the bilateral relationship with China.
So then in turn, that affects the geopolitics of the situation. Do you think would it be an exaggeration to say that Azerbaijan has become a diplomatic priority for Beijing?
I mean, if to look at Chinese priorities from the perspective of market access, I mean, China wants to get access to Europe, and it is a physical access. It's not financial services where you don't need that physicality, as is the case with the United Kingdom. Therefore, naturally, China will invest and will increasingly be investing in the middle corridor infrastructure. Back in late 2023, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan created the Middle Corridor Consortium, and China joined it in 2024. And since then, they've been increasingly investing. This is going to increase trade flows and overall trade turnover volumes. And essentially, Azerbaijan and China are driven by pure geoeconomic factors and reasons. There's no desire, as long as Chinese political establishment is concerned, to export their ideology to Azerbaijan, and there's no vice versa inclination on the side of Azerbaijan. And there's a clear realization that Azerbaijan is China's naturally biggest trading partner in this region. And Azerbaijan has overtaken Georgia already. Armenia, by means of its scope, cannot compete with Azerbaijan in this particular respect. And Azerbaijan has done something extraordinarily shrewd, I think, in geopolitical terms. You got to, in the same way as the United Kingdom needs to balance between China, Europe, and the United States in its own transatlantic mindset, with some Pacific elements added to it, Azerbaijan needs to balance between US and China. I think the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity is a very good example of geopolitical balancing act. That infrastructure is an American footprint. But that infrastructure will allow China to access European markets. So by means of US footprint through Armenia, which connects Azerbaijan's two separate parts, mainland with Nakhchivan exclave, Azerbaijan simultaneously is actually giving that Chinese exports that leverage to reach Europe. I think in this construct, you would see the way, I think, in my humble opinion, the minds of those who are governing this nation's diplomacy think.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Ken, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure, Guy.
Okay, after the break, we take a look at Azerbaijan's state oil fund closing the year on a very strong footing, with assets climbing, returns holding steady, and a solid contribution flowing into the state budget. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond. It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back, you're watching PrimeTime. Azerbaijan's state oil fund has closed the year with a strong set of results. Its assets growing sharply, investment returns holding firm, and a substantial contribution made to the state budget. But behind the headline numbers sits a bigger story about how sovereign wealth funds work, how risk is managed in uncertain markets, and how long-term national priorities are protected across generations. Well, earlier today, I spoke with Sofaz's Deputy Executive Director at the fund's headquarters in Baku, and I asked him to walk us through the results and the thinking behind them. Well, Deputy Executive Director, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to this exclusive interview and for inviting us here to Sofaz headquarters. The results that we've seen today seem very positive, very strong, but there are many different elements to the numbers. Can you just talk us through some of the highlights?
Thank you very much. The fund assets as of 31st December of 2025 stood at 73.5 billion USD. Which is increase around 22.5% from the beginning of the year. And in terms of the investment performance, we have produced around 6.2% investment return, which is equivalent to the around 7 billion Azerbaijani manat, which is around $4 billion US dollar. Overall, the financial markets was very supportive for the portfolio in 2025, and we have produced positive results across all the asset classes. In terms of the main contributor to the portfolio, as a part of the local investment performance, was the public equities. And of course, the role of the physical gold, the gold performance was very substantial in terms of the overall asset under management growth.
Yeah, very interesting. Challenging times out there in the global economy, but a very solid set of results. And many of our viewers, many of the people who comment on social media, many of the people that we meet, that we interview, are fascinated, frankly, by sovereign wealth funds and how they actually work, how they support the overarching strategies of the countries within which they sit. Just give us an explainer, if you could, on that. How does the fund work? How does it help to deliver the goals that Azerbaijan has for the nation?
The SOFAS is a sovereign wealth fund and national, long-term national wealth institution for the Azerbaijan. SOFA supports the national strategic objectives in structural and long-term way. And let me to frame it into three dimensions. First one is the resilience, and second one is the intergenerational value, and the third one is the institutional stewardship. And all of this long-term approach is aligned with our national development priorities, which set in highest level, also include the strategic direction articulated by the President Ilham Aliyev. First is about the macroeconomic resilience. I think the Sovereign Wealth Fund, we all know about this, that the Sovereign Wealth Fund is well positioned to strengthen the country's capacity to manage the volatility by maintaining a well and professional managed asset base. It's not about it's not only about the intervening in the difficult time, but it's about the decreasing this vulnerability across the time. And second one is about intergenerational equity. And the fund exists. We all know that this natural resource revenues are finite, but the national wealth should be durable. The fund exists to transform all of this national resource revenues into long-lasted asset base. And as a SOFAS, so we are trying to build this portfolio for the future generation. And the third one is the institutional stewardship through the governance. I think the governance is very important. We all know about that. The SOFAS operates under, I would say, a long-term governance framework, and which translates our mandate into policies, portfolio objectives, and risk boundaries. It's supported by the clear approval authority for the decisions, and also independent review by the risk management, compliance, and other relevant functions, with well-defined and documented accountability. Of course, all of this help us to build a portfolio, to build an institution that could navigate through the different market regimes. SOFAS contributes to the country's broader financial and economic credibility, because by having an institution with the right governance, you signal you signal about this the stability, you see about this resilience. So it's not only important for the investment management, but it's also qualities that serve for the perception from the international community for our counterparts about the country's institutional capacity.
It's very interesting this, because the goals, the objectives are multifarious, different in character and nature to many other financial instruments that you might find. I mean, we had decades, didn't we, where the only goals really were shareholder or investor return. Then we've moved into an area where there are ethical, climate-related goals as well. But for a sovereign wealth fund, there are vastly more, aren't there? There are so many things that you need to achieve over a long period of time. With that burden of responsibility, how do you actually go about measuring success?
Yeah, I think this question is a very relevant question to any sovereign wealth funds. For us, the way we manage and measure success through the cycle-based lens. For us, a single year is just a data point, and I think every single sovereign wealth fund should be assessed across different market regimes. I think the first important part in this exercise is mandate alignment. And this is about the intergenerational equity again. This is about resilience, and this is about delivering the sustainable results with the well-disciplined, well-managed the risks. And this is also the labeling. This is also the segmenting the portfolio into the functional labels, but not the ordinary labels. So that means one part of the portfolio should preserve the liquidity. Another part of the portfolio should stabilize the portfolio behavior, and another part of the portfolio should add the long-term growth of the portfolio. So I think all of this is very important for the long-term sovereign wealth funds. And second one is about the risk management. For us, risk management is very central in portfolio management. It's not It's how it's built into the portfolio construction and decision. It's how the decisions are taken. For us, risk management is about the diversification, is about the ongoing monitoring, it's about the scenario thinking overall, because it helps us to navigate through the different market environments, through the low economic growth, high volatility, high interest rates, and it's also consistent with our long-term mandate. And if you look at the portfolio for the last 5 years, we have the portfolio was around 44 billion for 5 years ago. Now we are managing around 74 billion USD. It's around 30 billion in absolute terms, the return. And around the most fascinating fact that around 76% of this increase is coming from the investment related activities, of course including the FX and the gold effects.
It's fascinating. Huge complexity, taking an awful lot of dexterity to manage. We congratulate you on these latest results, and we thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. Monsieur Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back to Primetime. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa in Moscow today, his second visit since October. Well, the talks ranged across bilateral ties, defence cooperation, and what comes next for Syria's state institutions. It's another sign of how closely Moscow and Damascus are working together as both sides look to manage security priorities and shape the next phase of their relationship. Well, joining me now in the studio to break this down for all of us is A News's Nigar Shirinova. Nigar, great to see you. Okay, break this down for us then. Why does this meeting matter and why does it matter now?
Okay, guys, thank you so much for having me, first of all. So this meeting matters in a very significant moment for both Syria and for Russia. So we can say that if we delve into it, we can say that for Russia it's very clear that the gains here are its military base in Syria because it has the Tartus naval base and the Khmeimim air base there in Syria. So it's very clear that Russia wants to keep the military base in Syria and wants to have the pressure, not pressure, but the influence and power, we can say that, in Syria, and especially after the post-war and when Syria is becoming and coming back to regional diplomacy. So this is the aim and goal of Russia for this period of time, and specifically in this meeting with Ahmad al-Sharaa. And if we look at this meeting from the Syrian perspective, we can say that especially in, not only for Syria, but especially for Ahmad al-Sharaa here, it's having Russia is more about the security guarantee here, and also it's more about the political reassurance that they have kind of cooperation and coordination together with Russia, and they have the diplomatic back, and Russia is always there to protect, to give security guarantees. So if we look at this meeting, we can definitely say that it's mutually beneficial, and especially for Russia when it's still the Russia-Ukraine conflict is continuing. So it's for both sides, it's strategically important. We can say that for Russia and for Syria, it's more about mutual benefits and mutual survival, we can even say.
And for Ahmed al-Shara, it's his second visit to Moscow in just a few months. I mean, there's no holding back. I mean, this is a relationship developing at pace, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is also a very important moment where we should look at, because these kind of meetings, when they are happening frequently in diplomacy, it means that there is something, the relations are intensifying. So we can say that here, Ahmed al-Shara's second visit definitely shows us that Syria is relying on Russia, and they are seeking some kind of diplomatic backpacking, especially after the post-war. They are coming to the diplomacy, and they also try to have the coordination and diplomatic backpacking from the Russia, and some kind of. We can also say that when this kind of diplomatic events, meetings are happening in a few months, like several times frequently, we can definitely say that these are the outcomes from these kind of meetings are very important, and also we can say that they can be some military arrangements, some long-term perspectives, some long-term agreements maybe there, and also they might sign some kind of important documents. So the long-term cooperation is coming, and also here we can also say that Russian influence in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Middle East region, this is very important, because Russia signals to the world that it's actually, despite the fact that they are very busy there in the Ukraine front, but they can have the diplomacy in other regions as well, including the Middle East, and it shows that Russia is engaged in this region. And also it would be interesting to compare the relations of Russia-Syria with Russia-Turkey, because this is the contrast there is very appealing. So if we look Russia-Syria relations, it's more about, we can say it's about dependency, and they have mutual benefits, because Russia is a security guarantor for Syria, and Syria is a military base in the region, in the Middle East, and Russia can always has an influence in this region. But with Turkey, it's different. It's a totally different case, because Russia and Turkey in relation, they are not, they are partners and also competitors at the same time, because they're partnering, they're having partnerships on energy and trade, but they're also competing in Syria, Black Sea, and the South Caucasus, we can even say. So,
and just going back to Russia and Syria, then, I mean, you mentioned their dependency, mutual benefits. How are Russian officials describing, characterizing this phase of the relationship? Is it about continuity, or do they see it as taking things very much to the next level?
So it's definitely continuity, because Russia is definitely, it's like supporting sovereignty of the country, integrity, territorial integrity of Syria. So they are more, and this second meeting of presidents, leaders, and in such a short period of time, it's definitely showing to the world, it's a signal that the cooperation and coordination between two countries are continuing, and we can expect some long-term agreements, military arrangements from these two countries, and also Russia is definitely signaling that it has the influence in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe, despite the fact that they have the conflict and war there in Ukraine, in Russia-Ukraine front.
And what's realistically on the table, Nigar, from these meetings? What can we actually expect? Are we talking strategy, structures, or really more just kind of high-level reassurance?
So I think it's all of them, structure, reassurance and strategy, because here is first, if we look from the strategy perspective, it's more about making sure that the military bases there in Syria, we said Tartus and Khmeimim, Russia is trying to secure their military bases there. So they want to have the strategy that they are sure that it's there and they have the control in the Syria. And if we look at the structure, it's more about how two countries, they want to formalize and modernize their relations, their cooperation in the future, especially after the post-war, in the rebuilding period and in the coming back to the diplomacy, to the regional diplomacy for Syria. This is about that. And of course, reassurance, the Russian side, they are reassuring that they are in the region. They have the influence and control there, and for Syrian side, of course, it's a security reassurance, and they believe that they can have cooperation and the diplomatic security back from the Russian side.
And Igor, of course, lots of actors across the region will be watching this relationship develop very carefully. Yeah. Who is happy about this relationship going well? Who is most interested, and who is perhaps a bit worried?
So that's a very interesting question. We can say that if we look at the neighbors, regional countries, of course, the regional countries would like to have the security and peace in the region. So this would be if the security, if the post-war is going in a good cooperation and long-term stability in the region. So everything is good for the regional countries, but also we should make sure that Russian influence is there, here and in the region, in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Turkey neighborhood. And if we look from the perspective of Turkey, Iran, some other regional countries, so they should know that despite the fact that Russia is having the conflict war with Ukraine, but still it shows that it's very engaged in this region, and it has the military base, it has the control here, and it should be always be in mind. And it's not a threat, but Russia is showing and signaling, it's a message that I'm here and I have an influence in this region.
A lot of elements to this story. And Igor, thank you very much for following it so closely.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents all around the world. Don't go away. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. Monsieur Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm J-Dad. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now let's cross over to our correspondents from around the world. And we start in Europe as the continent has hit a landmark moment in car sales. Fully electric vehicles have for the first time outsold petrol-only models. But the picture shifts once hybrids are added in, with internal combustion engines still making up the bulk of overall sales. Now, registrations are climbing, yet questions remain over charging infrastructure and whether European car makers can stay competitive in a rapidly changing market. A News's Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where the bloc sees fully electric vehicles outselling petrol-only cars for the very first time. It's a symbolic milestone in the continent's transition from fossil fuels, but it's important to note that many petrol models are now registered as mild hybrids. That means internal combustion engines still dominate overall sales when hybrids are included. The rise in EV registrations underscores progress, but it also highlights a critical challenge: getting enough charging infrastructure in place to support the growing fleet. There are more than 500,000 public charging points across the EU, but studies show the bloc needs to install hundreds of thousands more each year to reach the European Commission's target of 3.5 million chargers by 2030. That's a pace that current growth rates have yet to match. Meanwhile, utilities and grid operators are planning upgrades to handle surges in charging demand and prevent congestion on local networks. That infrastructure gap matters. Without enough chargers, especially high-speed stations along main corridors, EV owners face longer waits and range anxiety, particularly outside major cities. Countries like the Netherlands, which already has one of Europe's most extensive networks, are already warning that even faster expansion is necessary to keep pace with adoption. Europe's EV boom also intersects with heightened global competition. According to the European Alternative Fuels Observatory, Volkswagen reported record EV registration growth last year, a sign that European automakers are fighting to hold ground. At the same time, Chinese brands such as BYD continue to gain share in European markets, putting more pressure on legacy manufacturers and sharpening debates about industrial strategy, supply chains, and technological leadership. For policymakers, the message is very clear. Increasing EV sales is only one part of the transition. Europe must also build the infrastructure and competitive industrial base to sustain that growth while navigating a rapidly evolving global market. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
From the European continent to Great Britain now, and Storm Chandra continues to cause major disruption across the UK, with more than 100 flood warnings in force and icy conditions adding to the strain in many areas. Heavy rain and strong winds have worsened flooding on already saturated ground, with travel networks, schools and power supplies all affected. A News' Zainab Farajada has the latest now.
Storm Chandra is still causing major disruption across the UK, with more than 100 flood warnings in place across England and yellow weather warnings for ice covering much of the country during the morning commute. The storm, the third named storm of the year, brought heavy rain and strong winds on Tuesday, worsening flooding in areas where the ground was already saturated after Storm Ingrid struck over the weekend. National Rail says passengers should expect delays and cancellations across England, Scotland and Wales, with disruption likely to continue until Friday. In Somerset, a major incident has been declared after around 50 properties were flooded. Authorities warn further disruption is possible, and a yellow rain warning remains in place for south-west England on Thursday. On Tuesday, 2 severe flood warnings indicating danger to life were issued but have since been lifted. One of the worst hit areas was Devon, where the River Otter reached its highest recorded level. The storm also caused widespread disruption beyond flooding. Hundreds of schools closed in parts of England and Northern Ireland, with more than 10,000 properties losing power at the peak. Flights and ferry services were also cancelled. Storm Chandra follows Ingrid and Goretti, making it the third major storm to hit the UK in January, with the Met Office warning some areas have seen some of the most impactful weather in decades. Zainab Farajada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Well, from Manchester, let's head much further south now, all the way to Turkey, where tensions remain high in northern Syria and diplomacy is still very much in play. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has held a phone call with US President Donald Trump, discussing the situation on the ground, ceasefire efforts and wider ties. Adam Morrow has the story.
President Erdogan held a phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday, focusing on developments in Syria and ongoing efforts to stabilize the wider Middle East. According to Turkish state media, the two leaders also discussed ways to boost bilateral trade, particularly in the defense industry field. Following the call, Erdogan said Turkey remains committed to deepening cooperation with the United States and emphasized the importance of fully implementing the ceasefire agreement in Syria. The truce, which was announced earlier this month between Damascus and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, was extended last week by another 15 days. Erdogan warned against the formation of any separate armed entities in Syria, referring to earlier calls by Kurdish groups for autonomy in the region. Speaking to reporters in Ankara, he said there can be no state within a state, stressing the need for a unified political solution under the terms of the ceasefire. He added that the era of violence and terrorism must end, calling on Syrian Kurds not to be misled by what he described as efforts to sow division in the region. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Well, staying with this theme of diplomatic tension, we head east to Iran, and Tehran has summoned Italy's ambassador, reacting strongly to what it calls irresponsible remarks by Rome's foreign minister about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Italian ambassador in Iran, Paolo Amadei, was summoned to the foreign ministry on Tuesday, following comments by Italy's foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, about Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Italy's top diplomat had said that Rome intends to encourage other European Union states to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Assistant Foreign Minister and Director General for Western Europe, Alireza Yousefi, warned the Italian envoy of the damaging consequences of any labeling of the IRGC. He also said that Iran's Revolutionary Guard has a legal status and is an official branch of the Iranian armed forces. According to the Foreign Ministry statement, the Italian ambassador in Tehran said she would promptly convey Iran's position to her respective government in Rome. On Monday, Tajani urged the EU to list IRGC as a terrorist organization following Iran's crackdown on violent protests in the last 3 weeks. Tajani said he would raise his suggestion in coordination with other partners at the upcoming meeting of EU foreign ministers in Brussels on Thursday. Tehran and Rome have traditionally friendly relations and sizable trade ties, which have been marred in recent years mostly because of EU's approach to Iran's nuclear program. Last year, Italy hosted the 5th round of Iran-US nuclear negotiations mediated by the Sultanate of Oman in Rome, before these talks were halted by the Israel-US 12-day war on Iran last June. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, for A News.
From Tehran to Tashkent now, Uzbekistan is stepping up engagements with major global investors as a BlackRock affiliate explores potential investments across the country's oil and gas sector and wider infrastructure projects. A News' Seville Rajapova reports.
Uzbekistan has discussed potential investment with Global Infrastructure Partners, a company linked to BlackRock, focusing on oil and gas and infrastructure projects. The discussions were held with the Minister of Investment, Industry and Trade and focused on attracting long-term capital to priority projects. The talks covered opportunities to modernize oil and gas infrastructure, introduce advanced technologies and support large-scale projects in energy, transport and sustainable development. Separately, representatives of Global Infrastructure Partners met with Uzbekistan's state oil and gas company to review potential investment options in existing assets and future development projects. All proposals are expected to undergo detailed financial and economic assessment. Uzbekistan's oil and gas sector remains one of the main pillars of the economy, with annual production exceeding 50 billion cubic meters of natural gas, while key international partners already active in the sector include companies from Russia, China and South Korea. The engagement reflects Uzbekistan's broader strategy to diversify investment sources, strengthen cooperation with global institutional investors, and support long-term growth in strategic sectors of the economy. It is Seville Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Okay, after the break, we will turn to football as Liverpool host Karabakh at Anfield on a huge Champions League night for Azerbaijan's most recognisable club. Don't go away.